Welcome back to Beneath the Data. I'm Kelly Beck, Clinical Director here at Beck Behavior Therapy, and I'm here with...
I'm Emily Wood. I'm an RBT here at Beck Behavior. I do in-home sessions.
So last week we talked about kind of what ABA therapy is in general and some general things that we like for people to know about ABA. And this week we wanted to kind of take that a step further and start talking about what is neurodiversity affirming therapy, which we mentioned last week. We wanted to go into a little more detail there. And then we wanted to also talk about child-led therapy and kind of give you some information about that. So first of all, let's talk about our neurodiversity affirming therapy. So there's a couple of highlights we want to hit here. This means a lot of things for a lot of people. And so for us, we mentioned last week, it means we don't stop stems that are not harmful. We
focus on regulation.
Right. But let's take it a little further. So kind of our first point being we in ABA world, we call it presume competence.
Yes.
But let's kind of make that a little more
digestible,
a little more viewer friendly. Yeah. So tell me what that means to you.
So for me, that means you're going to assume no matter the child's support need level or their language abilities, that they understand what you're saying to them and what you're saying around them. So in the clinic, that's going to look like, you're not having conversations about the client in front of them as if they're not there. And when you're explaining something to the client, you're explaining it as logically as you can, without assuming that they're not going to understand just because they don't have the language to affirm that they understand.
Exactly. And likewise, from like a parent perspective, it's assuming that, your child is capable of understanding. So when you're driving in the car and you're going somewhere, you're telling them where you're going. We're going to therapy with Miss M, and then we're going to go to Burger King, and we're telling them everything that we're going to do so that they are a part of that. We're not just assuming that because they aren't able to say, oh, Mom, where are we going? That they don't know.
Yeah.
And we tell them all about what they're going to experience there. So another point is kind of going into respecting and teaching consent, which is a big thing for us.
Yes. Making sure that your client has the skills and the ability to tell you no if they're not comfortable doing something, if they're not ready to do something, and making sure that to the best of your ability as the adult, you're honoring that consent and you're making sure that their feelings are heard. And this can look different depending on where the client is at communication wise. It might be giving them a sign or, a PEX card, or using their AAC device, or just giving them a very simple phrase that they can repeat back to you to let you know that they're not comfortable with what's going on. And that kind of allows you to step back and shift gears and see if there's something you need to change about the environment or the demand to help them meet it.
Right. So because we know we kind of talked briefly about last week, there's this kind of stigma that ABA is abusive and it teaches kids to just be overly compliant. And so we're really passionate about, teaching kids it's okay to say no. It's okay to have thoughts and feelings. And of course, there's always a balance to that. We're not just going to let kids say no to everything and get their way with everything.
Yeah.
There's always that kind of coming back and learning denied access and learning those boundaries from their parent. We don't tell the parents you have to say yes to everything.
Yeah.
But we're just kind of also trying to teach the child it's okay to say, no, I don't like that. And let's do it in a nice way. A lot of our pre-verbal kiddos have some, not great ways of saying no. So, it's better that we give a better way for them to do that. Yeah. So respecting consent is huge. And that's the big shift we're seeing with ABA therapy too, and trying to not be so compliance based and
focusing less on compliance and more on regulation and making sure the client is comfortable and they understand what's being expected of them instead of just forcing them to do something that they don't understand.
Yeah. We don't want to do that. Yeah. And then finally kind of talking about neurodiversity affirming, looking at things not being deficits, they're just differences.
Yeah.
And respecting that it's just a brain
Yeah.
difference and they have, just a different skill set as any other person that you come into contact with.
Yep.
And so we don't need to see things as something that's fixable.
Yeah.
We don't
We're
need to
not
fix it.
here to fix anything. We don't want to change who our clients are as people or as individuals. We want to help them and the people around them better understand how their brain works so that they can navigate the world in a way that's not so stressful.
Yeah. So let's jump into child-led therapy. This really goes along with this concept of neurodiversity affirming and then
Yeah.
going into child-led because that's a huge component of child-led
Yeah.
therapy. So tell us, first of all, kind of a quick definition of what that means.
So, child-led therapy is essentially just following the client's lead and finding a way to target your skills with whatever they're gravitating towards. So, rather than planning a session and before the child even gets here, you have activities laid out and you have it in your head that this is what we're going to do and this is what the session's going to look like. You allow the child to come in and you just pay attention to what they're naturally gravitating to, and you find a way to work your targets into what they're doing instead of the other way around. You're giving them the lead and giving them control on how they learn and what they learn, and it's all at their own pace.
Right. So that really leads us to those purposeful sessions, which is one reason why we feel like we still have so much success here, even with
Yeah.
short 1-2 hour sessions, because everything is purposeful. We're being, we're going along with the child. They're comfortable, but we're also finding those ways to teach all of our skills.
Yeah. And we're focusing on therapeutic services.
Yes. And another thing is teaching those boundaries.
Yes.
And kind of like we talked about before, teaching them how to be, teach those respectfully.
Yes.
And we're still giving the client consent, getting that assent from the client. But it's still okay to have those boundaries in child-led. That doesn't mean that with child-led therapy, it's
a free-for-all.
You're not falling around doing whatever, you're going to that toy that they're really engaged with and you're thinking, okay, how can I pull in their goals that we need to work on with this object that they're interested in right now.
And if they start using that object in a way that's unsafe, then you set the boundary and you explain to them why you're setting that boundary and why that boundary needs to be held. And if it causes distress for the client, like a lot of denied access usually does, then you help them regulate and you help them work through that moment while still holding the demand.
Yes. And then one thing we kind of wanted to talk about to kind of give viewers something to kind of hold on to is when you're doing that child-led therapy, kind of do what we kind of call it our check your boxes.
Yes.
When you're making sure that you've tried to decipher if they're starting to be uncomfortable, they're having a behavior, are they hungry? Are they thirsty? Are they tired? Do they need some sensory input? What else can we...
Do they feel safe in the environment, and do they trust that if they're with you, you're going to meet their needs regardless of what's going on? They need to understand that when they come to therapy, it's a safe place for them, and their sensory and physical and emotional needs are going to be met. And also making sure that they understand what you're asking of them and understand the logic behind the demand or the task that you're giving them.
Yeah, because you can definitely do it in an age appropriate way. Even with your young learners, you can still, tell them, we're not going to climb on that. That's not safe, friend.
Yeah.
And explain that's why we're not doing that.
Yeah. And that goes back to presuming competence too, is explaining it in a way that, they might not be able to verbally affirm that they know what you're saying, but explaining it anyways and understanding that there is a good chance that they'll understand the logic behind it and they may not accept it still, but that you've done what you can to keep them safe and you've explained to the best of your abilities why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, so remember that when you're looking at child-led therapy and is my child participating in child-led therapy or other therapists, kind of check your boxes, make sure you're doing all those things.
Yeah.
And you can feel like you're going to have a better child-led session.
Yes.
Well, that's all we have time for today.
Yep.
We've got a ton of things planned coming up. I'm going to start diving into hopefully some really helpful topics for our parents, some things from parent perspectives, perspectives of those on the spectrum. And we're just going to dive through a lot of different topics over the next several
Yep.
months. So thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.